What happens when the very people meant to protect a child become their worst nightmare? Today, we uncover the heartbreaking story of a 6-year-old boy left to waste away in silence while those responsible for his care turned their backs on him. A child so severely neglected that by the time authorities discovered him, it was already too late. Welcome back to True Crime Buff HQ, where we shine a light on the darkest corners of humanity. Before we delve into this devastating case, I want to thank each and every one of you for your continued support. Your comments, likes, and subscriptions help us bring these important stories to light. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and join our growing community dedicated to seeking justice through awareness. The story you're about to hear contains shocking revelations about parental negligence that will leave you questioning how such cruelty could go unnoticed for so long. What drove a mother to allegedly starve her own child as an act of revenge? And how did a system designed to protect children fail so catastrophically? Stay with me as we uncover the tragic life and death of Christian Omar Mangosovich. Christian Omar Mangosovich entered this world in 2018 in Mexico, born into circumstances that would ultimately seal his fate. His father, Marco Antonio Mangos Velasco, was a Mexican lawyer, a professional who understood the law yet would later be accused of flagrantly disregarding his legal and moral obligations to his own flesh and blood. Christian's mother, Olga Idolevich, had a more complex background. A Russian citizen who had relocated to Mexico, Olga worked as a high-end escort in the vibrant nightlife district of Benito Juarez, a Mexican city home to over 400,000 inhabitants. According to multiple sources, Marco Antonio was one of Olga's regular clients, and their professional relationship took an unexpected turn when she became pregnant with his child. The pair, despite never forming a romantic partnership, initially decided to proceed with the pregnancy. Marco Antonio reportedly promised to support Olga in raising their son, a commitment that would slowly evaporate as time passed. Court documents revealed that by 2019, just 1 year after Christian's birth, Marco Antonio had already begun distancing himself from his financial responsibilities toward his son. What makes this case particularly heartbreaking is the complete isolation in which little Christian existed. Marco Antonio's family appeared to have no knowledge of the child's existence, while Olga's family back in Russia had severed ties with her, disapproving of her chosen profession. Some acquaintances of Olga suggested this family rejection was among the primary reasons she had left Russia for Mexico in the first place, seeking a fresh start where her past wouldn't haunt her. As Christian grew into toddlerhood, his living situation became increasingly dire. Despite being a mere 6 years old, an age when children require constant supervision, nourishment, and care, Christian was routinely left alone in the apartment while his mother worked night shifts at local establishments. There is no evidence that Christian ever received basic medical care or attended any educational institution. This young boy, who should have been learning his alphabet and making friends, was instead learning to survive alone in an empty apartment, sometimes going without food for extended periods. The relationship between Christian's parents deteriorated into a bitter legal battle. Court documents show that Olga filed numerous complaints against Marco Antonio after he ceased providing financial support. Her frustration spilled onto social media, where she publicly condemned Christian's father for abandoning them to live in poverty, a situation she claimed was never part of their agreement. "I didn't want to have to rely on him to pay the bills," she wrote in one particularly revealing post, "but as Christian's father, he is obligated to help, and I have no choice but to demand it." In another alarming statement, she claimed she and her son were starving due to Marco Antonio's complete negligence. Perhaps most chilling was Olga's ominous warning on social media that she was at her limit, and that, sooner or later, she would do something reckless. These digital breadcrumbs, overlooked at the time, would later serve as haunting premonitions of the tragedy to come. As 2024 drew to a close, the situation in the small apartment where Christian lived with his mother had deteriorated beyond imagination. December 30th started as any other day in Benito Juarez, streets bustling with post-Christmas activity, families preparing for New Year's celebrations, while behind closed doors, a 6-year-old boy lay dying in unspeakable conditions. Two conflicting accounts exist of what transpired that fateful day. The version most widely circulated by media outlets suggests that Olga herself contacted emergency services after realizing her son had fallen into a critical state. According to this account, she returned home to find Christian lying motionless in bed, his condition rapidly deteriorating to the point where even she, who had neglected him for so long, recognized the gravity of the situation. However, a second version, provided by neighbors who had witnessed Christian's deterioration over months, paints a far more disturbing picture. These neighbors claimed they were the ones who alerted authorities after noticing they hadn't seen or heard the boy in days. Their concern was amplified by the fact that Christian had frequently cried out in desperation, particularly when his mother was physically abusing him or abandoning him for extended periods. These same neighbors recounted heartbreaking attempts to help the child, describing how Christian would beg them for food through the door. Moved by compassion, they would slide sustenance under the apartment door, a lifeline that was cruelly severed when Olga discovered their intervention. In an act of unfathomable cruelty, she allegedly confined Christian to his room, forbidding him from leaving even to accept the neighbors' offerings. As weeks passed, these concerned residents watched helplessly as Christian visibly lost weight, his small frame becoming increasingly skeletal, until one day they saw him no more. Despite previous attempts to engage with Olga directly and even filing reports with authorities, no meaningful intervention had occurred. It was only when they feared the worst that they made the critical call that would finally bring Christian's suffering to light. When police officers arrived at the apartment complex and gained entry to Olga's unit, they encountered a scene that would haunt them for the remainder of their careers. Christian lay beneath several blankets, so weak he couldn't move, his body reduced to skin stretched tightly over bones, his once pink lips now a sickly yellow. The level of emaciation indicated prolonged starvation, his tiny body desperately consuming itself in a futile attempt to stay alive. The responding officers immediately called for emergency medical services. Video footage captured by authorities during this intervention shows the medical team gently removing the blankets covering Christian, revealing the full extent of his malnourishment. Throughout this process, Olga remained close to the paramedics and officers, offering little explanation for her son's condition beyond claiming language barriers prevented her from understanding their questions. When paramedics inquired about Christian's age, Olga stated he was 6 years old, information that likely intensified the medical team's horror as they assessed the severely underweight child before them. When questioned about any existing medical conditions, Olga reportedly began evading their inquiries, insisting she didn't understand Spanish well and preferred to communicate in English, a tactic investigators would later suggest was aimed at delaying and confusing first responders. Despite the immediate medical intervention, Christian's organs had already suffered irreparable damage from prolonged malnutrition and dehydration. He was rushed to the hospital, but the situation was beyond salvageable. On December 31, 2024, as the world prepared to celebrate the arrival of a new year, little Christian Omar Mangosovich took his final breath in a hospital room, surrounded not by family who loved him, but by medical professionals who had known him for less than 24 hours. Perhaps most heartbreaking of all, no one came to claim Christian's body from the hospital, not his mother, not his father, not a single family member. The child who had lived in isolation died in the same manner, abandoned by those who should have cherished him most. I know this case is difficult to process, the details are truly heartbreaking. If you're finding value in our coverage of these important stories, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to True Crime Buff HQ. Your support enables us to continue shining a light on cases that might otherwise remain in the shadows. The investigation into Christian's death is about to take several shocking turns that you won't want to miss. After watching, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on what you believe should happen to parents who neglect their children. Thank you for standing with us in our quest for justice. When news of Christian's death broke, public outrage was immediate and intense. The case spread virally across social media platforms, placing immense pressure on authorities to deliver swift justice. On January 13, 2025, a prominent Mexican journalist aired an in-depth report on Christian's story, including the disturbing footage recorded by authorities inside the apartment. This broadcast catalyzed even greater public demands for accountability. As investigators began piecing together the circumstances surrounding Christian's death, a disturbing portrait of extreme neglect emerged. The apartment where Christian had spent his short life lacked electricity due to unpaid bills, meaning the boy had been living without heat, proper refrigeration for food, or even light during the dark winter evenings. Basic utilities such as gas, water, and internet had also been disconnected for non-payment, creating conditions wholly unsuitable for human habitation, let alone for a developing child. One of the building administrators revealed to police that Olga had not paid rent for several months. When confronted about these arrears, she would reportedly respond with aggression, refusing to vacate the premises despite failing to meet her financial obligations. This pattern of avoidance extended to all her financial responsibilities, creating increasingly desperate living conditions for her son. The investigation took a significant turn when both Christian's parents were formally charged with criminal negligence. However, when officers arrived at Olga's apartment to execute the arrest, they discovered she had vanished. Neighbors reported seeing her hastily removing personal belongings from the apartment the very same day Christian died, December 31, 2024, after which she completely disappeared. Marco Antonio, Christian's father, was eventually located and brought in for questioning. During his testimony, he categorically denied responsibility for his son's death, insisting that Christian's care fell solely under Olga's purview. He claimed to have provided support, whenever he could, a statement directly contradicted by the court documents showing his systematic failure to appear at hearings specifically scheduled to establish a formal custody and support agreement. Marco Antonio was temporarily released but remained under legal scrutiny as the investigation continued. Perhaps the most shocking revelation came when investigators began examining Olga's financial situation. Despite her persistent complaints of poverty and claims that she couldn't afford to properly care for Christian, police discovered she was earning up to $500 daily working as a high-end escort. This staggering income directly contradicted her public narrative of financial hardship and raised disturbing questions about her motives for neglecting her son. Interviews with Olga's acquaintances yielded the most disturbing theory of all. According to these sources, Olga's treatment of Christian was not simply neglect but deliberate cruelty motivated by a desire for revenge against Marco Antonio. These friends described how Olga would only purchase necessities for Christian when Marco Antonio sent child support payments, which occurred sporadically at best. The child essentially became a pawn in a vindictive game between parents, with devastating consequences. These same sources described Olga as having a volatile personality, reacting with aggression whenever questioned about her treatment of Christian. They painted a picture of a woman who maintained a lavish lifestyle for herself while depriving her child of basic necessities, even flaunting expensive purchases on social media while simultaneously claiming poverty. As the investigation progressed, authorities uncovered additional disturbing details about Christian's living conditions. Neighbors reported that Olga frequently brought clients to her apartment while Christian was present, many of whom arrived armed, creating an atmosphere of fear among other residents. The proximity of such potentially dangerous individuals to a vulnerable child raised serious questions about the oversight failures that allowed this situation to persist despite multiple reports to authorities. As investigators continued their search for Olga Idolevich, a more complete picture of her emerged. Beyond her professional facade as a high-end escort, authorities discovered she was residing in Mexico illegally. This revelation added another layer of complexity to the case and potentially explained her swift disappearance following Christian's death. Law enforcement now suspects that Olga's connections to organized crime may have facilitated her escape. Given that many of her clients were reportedly linked to drug cartels, she potentially had access to resources and networks that could help her evade capture. Investigators believe she may have crossed into Central America, making her apprehension significantly more challenging. The psychological profile developed by investigators suggests a woman driven by resentment and capable of extraordinary compartmentalization, maintaining a glamorous public persona while subjecting her child to unimaginable suffering. Her social media presence, filled with complaints about Marco Antonio's neglect while simultaneously showcasing her own lavish lifestyle, demonstrates a staggering disconnect between her public grievances and private actions. Under Mexico's penal code, abandoning a child unable to care for themselves can result in up to 4 years imprisonment, a penalty that many observers note seems woefully inadequate given the suffering Christian endured. Should Olga be captured and returned to face justice, she would likely face additional charges related to child abuse resulting in death, which carry significantly harsher penalties. Marco Antonio's legal situation remains somewhat ambiguous. While technically still under investigation, his release pending further proceedings has fueled additional public outrage. Many question how a father, particularly one trained in legal matters, could so completely abdicate responsibility for his child's welfare. His defense strategy appears centered on minimizing his legal obligations, claiming that his financial support was voluntary rather than mandatory, despite clear court rulings to the contrary. As of this recording, Olga remains a fugitive from justice, her whereabouts unknown. Marco Antonio continues to deny culpability while remaining under legal scrutiny. The contrast between their freedom, however tenuous, and the permanent loss of young Christian's life serves as a painful reminder of the inadequacies in child protection systems that allowed this tragedy to unfold. The death of Christian Omar Mangosovich sent shockwaves through Mexican society, prompting soul-searching about how a child could suffer so visibly without effective intervention. Community members in Benito Juarez organized vigils honoring Christian's memory, with many expressing guilt over not doing more to help the boy they occasionally glimpsed or heard crying through apartment walls. Child welfare advocates have seized upon this case to demand reforms in how reports of child endangerment are processed and prioritized. Multiple neighbors had reported concerns about Christian's welfare, yet these reports evidently failed to trigger meaningful investigation or intervention. This systemic failure has become a rallying point for organizations seeking to strengthen protection mechanisms for vulnerable children. Perhaps most heartbreaking is the status of Christian's remains. As of this recording, his body still lies unclaimed in the morgue, a final indignity for a child who never experienced the love and care every child deserves. Some community members have begun efforts to arrange a proper burial for Christian, determined that he should be laid to rest with the dignity denied to him in life. The case has also sparked important conversations about the responsibilities of bystanders who witness potential child abuse. Many who lived near Christian and observed his deteriorating condition now wrestle with guilt over not taking more decisive action. Mental health professionals working with these community members emphasize the importance of persistent reporting when child welfare concerns arise. Christian Omar Mangosovich lived only 6 short years, but the impact of his tragic story extends far beyond his lifetime. His case serves as both a heartbreaking reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty and a powerful call to action to better protect society's most vulnerable members. If you've made it this far, I want to sincerely thank you for bearing witness to Christian's story. These cases are never easy to cover, but they're essential to ensure such tragedies aren't forgotten. Your support of True Crime Buff HQ allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. If you found this coverage valuable, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest investigations. Each subscription helps us reach more viewers and potentially create the awareness that could save another child in danger. For those interested in similar cases involving systemic failures in child protection, check out our video on the Gabriel Fernandez case. When the system fails, you'll see the thumbnail appearing on your screen now. I'd like to leave you with this question: what changes do you believe are most urgently needed in child protection systems to prevent cases like Christian's? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters in this important conversation. Thank you again for your unwavering support. Together, we can make a difference by refusing to let these stories remain untold.